Welcome to Sound DeFi, the podcast that delivers key insights from thought leaders on all things DeFi, blockchain, crypto, and private market data. Today's episode is sponsored by Accumulate, a universal interconnected protocol for Web3, enhancing any layer 1 or 2 protocol with interoperability, higher throughput, low predictable cost, ULR addressing, key management, and robust digital identity capabilities. To learn more, visit www.accumulatenetwork.io.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Sound DeFi. On the screen, you see Michael Creadon. Michael's president of DeFi Devs. We're going to talk a little bit about Inveniam's DeFi Dev space today on the program. This podcast is all about delivering key insights from today's thought leaders on everything DeFi, blockchain, crypto, and private market asset data. And looking forward to the conversation again today. Michael, welcome.
Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Let's talk first a little bit about your experience in the public markets. Sure. And then I want to talk about, obviously, how that dovetails now into this new space on the private markets in our conversation today. But back me up in the public markets first.
Absolutely. I spent about 20 years at the Chicago Board of Trade and Chicago Mercantile Exchange. I started out like most people as a clerk, and then I was a trader, and then we started a firm, and I was CEO and head of risk at a fairly, mid-sized trading firm in Chicago. We had about 85 or 90 people at our peak. So very familiar with capital markets, and whether it be bonds, which is our forte, crude oil, natural gas, commodities, futures and options, and those things. And so I had a front row seat to be in public markets for 20 years. When I met Pat O'Meara 2 years ago or so, he told me about his vision to sort of disrupt private market assets. And his thought was that data was the key to get to that point. And so I was very intrigued from the start because I understood the size of these markets and some of the problems that are inherent with these assets, which, the net result is they're difficult to trade. And we could talk about that a little further, but through better data, that's the first step to get these assets to trade.
And it's right now sort of the market's cornered on the public side with the data, right? Unfairly.
I think so. Bain put out a report. I forget the number, but it was either 500 trillion or 900 trillion, just a staggering, incomprehensible number. And that's what's owned in private market assets like commercial real estate, private equity, private credit. So it's just an unbelievable sum. And these are held by pensions and endowments and family offices and the like, large corporations. But it's just difficult to trade these assets because they inherently don't trade very often. And so, you've got all this money tied up. And the key question is, how can you sort of provide greater liquidity to these assets, secondary trading, maybe get these assets to trade on exchanges? And that's sort of the key problem that I think Inveniam wants to solve. But there are a lot of steps that have to be taken to get there. And the first step is this step with better data. And then that's what the Inveniam IO platform, that's what it's built to, just the problem to solve.
And we'll be relying a lot on you in this Sound DeFi podcast because of not only your expertise in the areas you just described, but also you have a journalism background too. Tell us about that.
Yeah, thank you. I was in graduate school many years ago in New York. I was at Columbia, and I had an opportunity to get internships at Time Magazine and Bloomberg and Voice of America Radio. And it was just awesome. And then I worked after graduate school. I worked for Time in Australia for about a year and a half. And I got to tell you, all three of those places were just incredible places to learn how to be a journalist and work as a journalist. So I got great training. I really had no experience before that, but I did that for about 3 years. And, fast forward to today, and I've written now on LinkedIn for 4 straight years, every day, 7 days a week, rain or shine. But a lot of the techniques and approaches that I learned when I was a young journalist, I kind of apply to what I'm doing today. And I'm just glad I had that opportunity when I was younger because I just learned a ton. I was around some very, very talented people.
Tell us a little bit about how you got involved with Inveniam. How did that partnership come to be?
So Pat and I had met, and Frank Volchek, we had met in a previous transaction we were working on. I think that was in 2019, I think it was. Yeah, that's right. And so we had a series of calls and got to know one another. It was before COVID. Even then, we didn't meet in person. We just had a bunch of phone calls. And then about a year later, Pat reached out to me and said, "Hey, would you consider joining the team?" And I said, absolutely. I knew a little bit about what Inveniam was working on, and I just thought it was the right opportunity. I got to tell you, it is unbelievable, the growth that the company's had since I've been there. It's literally, it's incredible. I mean, when I started, there were phone calls in the Monday morning, like 5 or 6 people, and now and then you can't even fit all the faces on the screen. There's 40 people from around the world, and there's, another 60 overseas. It's just incredible. So, I mean, Pat has done so many things right, but I have to give him, if there's one single thing I'd give him credit to, it's building an outstanding team. I've just never been around so many talented people in my life in every facet of the firm, whether it's legal, capital markets, technology, HR, whatever it is. I mean, we just continue to add great people, and it's a very diverse crew. But and we're, we were decentralized before the pandemic, so we're kind of used to having people all around the country. There's pros and cons to it, but needless to say, I don't think we could have, if we were in one city, I don't think it would have worked. If we were in an office in one place. So we were kind of, I don't want to say lucky about the pandemic, but I mean, we were ready for it, I guess I would say, from a decentralization standpoint. And we've been, to grow a firm 6 or 10-fold during the pandemic is, I'd say, very impressive, to say the least. Because, I mean, obviously it's hard for us to go out and have dinners and meetings face-to-face with clients. That's a real challenge for any business. But we've been able to kind of muscle through it and just grow the business in spite of it.
And that gargantuan growth that has overtaken Inveniam in the last couple of years is exactly right size for the gargantuan opportunity that's out there in the private asset market space. Just talk about this opportunity and what the vision at the end of this that you see. You
always, especially as a writer, and you're a journalist too, you always want to be careful about hyperbole and just, grandiose statements that are just garbage. I don't know that there's any market in the world that's bigger than private market assets. I mean, maybe space. I mean, that's about the only thing I could think of that would be bigger. Maybe the space race. Okay, fine, I'll give you that. But there's nothing bigger. There's no bigger market that needs to be disrupted. And I think that, if you look forward to a world, maybe 5 to 10 years from now, let's just use, I use Wrigley Field as an example because I live a mile from there and I'm a Cub fan. What if, you had a monthly mark from Jones Lang LaSalle or Cushman or CBRE audited by a Deloitte or something? If you had a monthly mark on Wrigley Field, what is that asset worth? Where all the data had been credentialed, anchored to the blockchain, so that counterparties could trust that data. And you could say, well, it's worth 2.4 billion or 2.6 billion or 2.8 billion, whatever it is. And now you have, for 5 years, you've got a running tally on what you think the thing's worth based on all these inputs. Well, then, if you had that, then Brookfield Properties could come in, or Morgan Stanley or Citadel or anybody could come in and say, I want to buy 20% of Wrigley Field. Fine. And I mean, you could trade that like stocks are traded on the New York Stock Exchange. But then if you take that and just think, that's just not Wrigley Field, but what about every commercial real estate asset in the world? The Park Hyatt downtown, the Sears Tower, it just goes on and on and on. And then what if you could do that for private companies as well? I mean, you start to think about the amount of opportunity that exists. It's impossible to comprehend. So I think in a lot of respects, what we're trying to accomplish is we're solving a very big problem. But I also think we're so far kind of in front that we just have a little bit of a first mover advantage, in my estimation.
And what gets me excited about this, just thinking about the possibilities here, is back to your tenure in the public markets. Investors are looking for deals. They're looking at numbers. They're looking at growth and everything else. But the opportunity just widens for so many others. Not only for the companies that are looking to sell Wrigley Field or a particular piece of real estate or whatever, but also for the investors. I mean, that's probably most exciting. That's sharing the wealth, right?
100%. I mean, we have the chairman of our advisory board is a gentleman by the name of Sanjay Vatsa, who spent his career in many, many Wall Street shops like State Street and I believe Citigroup. And he's a real evangelist for sort of opening up markets globally to all investors, so there's true decentralization so that smaller investors would have access to deals that they never had before. I'm forgetting the exact word I want to use for that description. But anyway, he sort of has this vision and says, look, I mean, wouldn't it be great if smaller investors had access to private equity deals, over time? It's not going to happen overnight. And so I think that's part of the vision. Maybe a small part of the vision is just the democratization of markets. That's the long-term goal. There's so many steps that you have to go through to get there. But I think that to allow investments to be open to a wider network of investors is a very attractive idea.
You talked about trusting the data, credentialing the data, and then anchoring it in the blockchain. Why blockchain?
Well, if you think about it, the way I look at blockchain, the way I compare it to public market assets, it's like an audit trail, right? And an audit trail, like when you trade in a CME, if you buy 50 lot in corn or sell 100 bonds or whatever you do, there's an audit trail and you trust that data. Now, it's still anonymous. It won't tell you who bought it and who sold it, but you know that thing happened. You could bet your life on it, right? I mean, and there's zero ambiguity. And every investor in the world can see that. And it's effectively, it's a similar thing. I think blockchain is more sophisticated than an exchange audit trail, but that's the function it's trying to serve, is so that people can trust the data. They know exactly where the data came from, who changed it last, anything in and around. They don't. And so that's a very powerful thing. And, if you look at due diligence costs on the time and money it takes to sell a large building, a $100 million property or a $1 billion asset, it takes a year. I mean, it takes 9 months. But if you have all that data assembled and credentialed in the right manner, it just brings these costs down. And I mean, look, like anything else with technology, what you're doing is you're taking something that already exists, but you're making it much more efficient. That's really what Inveniam IO is. It's an efficiency tool because you could still do it the old way with Excel spreadsheets and other functions, but that world is kind of going in the rearview mirror.
I've heard the blockchain referred to as like the interstate highway before, as that kind of level of infrastructure. And I guess in your case, what you're talking about is speeding that process up, making it more efficient, really from the difference between a gravel road and a very long, dusty road and time versus an interstate, right?
Right. You just got to be careful with analogies and stuff. But you look at these blockchains, and I call them like one-lane highways. And like I've used Ethereum for the real purpose of transactions or not just to buy and sell Ethereum, but actually to send transactions on the Ethereum network. And obviously it's a great network. It's the number 2 protocol in the world, effectively behind Bitcoin. But gosh, is it deeply flawed? I mean, it can get slowed down. It's incredibly expensive. I always tell this story. I wanted to buy my first ever NFT, and I had a little bit of money in Ethereum or whatever at the time, nothing crazy. And so I was going to buy a $100 NFT, and I clicked send, and it was going to cost me $1,800 to send it. I'm like, I can't get my head around that. Could you imagine if you went on Amazon and tried to buy a sweatshirt for $100, and then they said the shipping cost is going to be $1,800, and you have no alternative? You're like, I can't buy it. I mean, unless I want to spend that. It's so preposterous. So I think the business that I'm with, Inveniam DeFi Devs, is built. We're the lead sponsor in a protocol called Accumulate. And we're sort of calling this the universal interconnect protocol that would allow chains to, send data back and forth. So now if you're on Ethereum, you could send data to another chain and vice versa. So instead of having this clogged one-lane highway, you're allowed to have exit ramps and on-ramps to send data to different protocols. We think that's obviously necessary. If you look at blockchain, our lead engineers, this is a fundamental flaw. You have these blockchains where your data is stuck on Ethereum or stuck on another chain. We don't think that's a long-term solution. And, so that's one of the many problems Inveniam DeFi Devs and Accumulate is trying to solve. But it's like you had talked about before, just a blockchain on you're on a gravel road going nowhere. That can be problematic.
Yeah. So talk a little bit about, Accumulate. Give me some real use cases where this has been successful.
Well, we're still sort of in startup mode. We're working on the test net. This is a hard fork of the Factum protocol and what we Accumulate. So a lot of it's still early days with the business development. But I'll give you one example. There's another project, one of the top, let's call it one of the top 50 projects in the world. And they're enamored by what we're working on and what Inveniam's working on. And they sort of reached out to us and said, look, we're a very big player in the blockchain world. What do you think about, potentially building some sort of platform for private market data? And we're it's early stages. It's early in the conversations. But the point is, I think what we're starting to see are a number of inbound calls to Inveniam and my team where people are seeing that they know what we're doing and they want to partner with us because they understand the problem. At the end of the day, Inveniam will have the clients that will have that data, right? And so that people will say, look, what if those clients wanted to sell that data? That gets really interesting, But I think the market is starting to recognize that Inveniam is incredibly well positioned to be a leader in private market assets. And so, like I said, now the inbound calls are coming to us. Propositions are coming at us. When you start a year ago, it was the other way around. We're just calling everybody and trying to tell our story and evangelize. And now I feel like it's shifted the other way. And I think that's, indicative of the fact that we're people are hearing the message and it's resonating.
So back to the future again, Michael, a little bit when it comes to Accumulate, whether it be private market assets or private equity or commercial real estate, we go through the Metaverse.
Yeah.
Just give me the vision there that you see. Again, yes, it's in its startup phase. It is, gaining interest, as you say, but where does it go?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, funny you mentioned the Metaverse. We had a team reach out to us that is very, very involved in different protocols and projects, including what is known as Axie Infinity, Decentralization, Sandbox. They're kind of in the cutting edge of the Metaverse. And I know it's weird because a lot of people don't know what the Metaverse is. They just kind of think it's just a name, but that's not the case at all. There's tremendous activity in and around various trading and gaming and all these different things. So I think when I look at the protocol of Accumulate, and I always ask this to Paul, I say, Paul, what's this tool built for? Is it built for a specific industry? He says, no, it's built for whoever can use the tool. And, so while this could be Accumulate could be unbelievably productive for Inveniam's needs and their private market asset needs, it can also serve an enormous purpose as it pertains to Metaverse and gaming. And again, you've built a tool that is scalable and can be applied to many different industries and solve problems across, global landscapes. So, it's funny. You almost don't want to just pick one thing. I mean, we had someone reach out to us just yesterday saying, "I've looked at all your white papers and light papers and web stuff, and we want to do some work in the healthcare industry." Great, that's amazing. I mean, so now say, all right, fine, let's go solve problems in that industry. The point being, I think the sky's the limit in terms of areas that we can disrupt.
Fascinating. We're going to learn a lot more on Sound DeFi from the experts at Inveniam and the DeFi Devs. Inveniam president Michael Creadon with us today for a great kickoff to Sound DeFi. We're going to spend a lot of time delivering key insights from today's thought leaders on DeFi, blockchain, crypto, private market, asset data, and so much more. So thanks for watching today. Scott Hennen saying so long. Michael, thank you for the time. Appreciate it.
Thanks. It's been a blast. Good to talk to you. Speak to you soon.
You too.
Bye. Bye-bye.